The empty chair. The December wind rattled the kitchen windows as Margaret set the last plate on the dining table. 23 years she'd been hosting Christmas dinner in this house, and her hands still trembled slightly as she arranged the silverware. But this year was different. This year, the trembling came from somewhere deeper than holiday nerves. She stepped back to survey her work. The table looked beautiful. Burgundy tablecloth, ivory candles in brass holders, her grandmother's china plates catching the afternoon light. Everything was perfect. Everything except the chair at the head of the table, her father-in-law's chair. Robert Hammond had sat in that chair for 42 consecutive Christmas dinners, first in his own home when Margaret was a young bride, learning to navigate her husband's boisterous family. Then here in their house, after he'd gotten too frail to host. The chair was a sturdy oak piece with carved armrests, bought specifically because Robert liked to rest his hands there while he told his stories, punctuating his words with gentle taps of his weathered fingers. He'd been gone since March. 9 months that felt both like yesterday and an eternity. Margaret touched the chair's high back, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingertips. Should she leave it there? Move it to the side? She'd been wrestling with this decision for weeks, lying awake at night, playing out different scenarios. If she left it empty, would it feel like a shrine, making everyone uncomfortable? If she removed it, would it seem like she was erasing him, pretending he'd never been part of these gatherings? Mom? Do you need help with anything? Her daughter-in-law, Sarah, appeared in the doorway, holding 18-month-old Emma on her hip. The toddler was dressed in a red velvet dress with white tights, already pulling at the bow in her hair. No, sweetheart, I think we're all set, Margaret said, forcing brightness into her voice. Is everyone else here? Your sister just pulled up. Daniel's helping her with the pies. Sarah shifted Emma to her other hip, her eyes drifting to the empty chair. She didn't say anything, but Margaret saw the flicker of recognition, the momentary tightening around her mouth. The house began to fill with the warm chaos of family arrival. Margaret's sister Louise swept in with her infamous pecan pie and equally infamous opinions about everything. Margaret's brother Tom came next with his wife Rita, bearing a green bean casserole and apologies for being late. The living room filled with coats and laughter and the particular brand of loving bickering that defined their family. But Margaret kept glancing toward the door, waiting for her son. Daniel was her youngest, 32 now, with his father's dark hair and his grandfather's gentle eyes. He and Robert had been especially close. When Daniel was little, Robert had taught him to fish, to fix things with his hands, to listen more than he spoke. When Daniel went through his divorce 3 years ago, it was Robert who'd sat with him on the back porch night after night, saying little, but providing everything Daniel needed. Robert's death had hit Daniel hardest of all. "There's my favorite grandson!" Louise's voice boomed from the living room. Margaret hurried out to find Daniel standing just inside the front door, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. He looked tired, she thought, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. He was holding a bottle of wine and wearing the blue sweater Robert had given him last Christmas, the last gift his grandfather would ever give him. "Hi, Aunt Lou," Daniel said, accepting her crushing hug. His eyes found Margaret over Louise's shoulder. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart." Margaret crossed the room to embrace him. He held on a moment longer than usual, and she felt the tension in his shoulders. "You okay?" Yeah, I'm good." But his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The house continued to fill. Margaret's eldest daughter, Claire, arrived with her husband, Mike, and their 2 teenage boys, who immediately disappeared to the basement with their phones. The noise level rose. Conversations overlapping, Emma shrieking with delight as she chased the cat, someone turning on Christmas music in the background. Margaret moved through it all in a practiced rhythm, checking the turkey, refilling drinks, directing traffic. But part of her attention stayed on Daniel, who'd settled into a corner of the living room, holding a beer he wasn't drinking, participating in conversations without really being present. "Dinner's ready," Margaret finally called. Everyone migrated toward the dining room, that beautiful controlled chaos of a large family gathering. Louise claimed her usual spot near the kitchen. Claire and Mike corralled their boys. Tom and Rita settled in with the ease of people who'd been doing this for decades. Sarah strapped Emma into a high chair borrowed from neighbors. And then everyone stopped moving. They'd all seen it at once, the chair at the head of the table, empty and waiting. The moment stretched out, awkward and heavy. Margaret felt her face flush. She should have moved it. She should have addressed this beforehand, not let everyone stumble into this uncomfortable silence. "I wasn't sure," she started, her voice thin. "I didn't know if I should—" "Mom." Daniel's voice cut through the moment. He was standing very still, staring at the chair, his jaw working. "Why is it still there?" The question landed like a stone. Everyone looked at Daniel, then at Margaret, then back at Daniel. "Honey, Margaret began. "Why is Grandpa's chair still at the table?" Daniel's voice was rising, something sharp and raw breaking through. "He's not here. He's not coming back. Why are we pretending he's still here?" "Daniel!" Sarah reached for his arm, but he stepped away. "We should move it," Daniel said, his breath coming faster. "We should just move it. We can't keep—" His voice cracked. "We can't keep acting like everything's the same when it's not. When he's not here." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "I know, sweetheart. I know he's not." "Then why?" Daniel gestured at the chair, his movements jerky, uncontrolled. "Why is it still there? Why are we all standing here looking at it like... He couldn't finish. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with unshed tears. The rest of the family stood frozen, uncertain. The Christmas music played on cheerfully from the living room, incongruous with the tension crackling in the dining room. "Daniel," Tom said gently, "maybe we should—" "I'll move it." Daniel crossed to the chair in 3 quick strides. He grabbed the back, his knuckles white against the dark wood. "I'll move it. We'll put it in the other room and we can all stop." But he didn't move it. His hands gripped the chair, his whole body rigid, and he stood there, not moving, not speaking, barely breathing. The silence stretched out, broken only by Emma's confused whimper from her high chair. Margaret watched her son, this man who'd tried so hard to be strong since March, tried to hold it together for everyone else, tried to move forward. And she watched as all of that careful control finally shattered. "I can't," Daniel whispered. His voice was breaking. Everything was breaking. "I can't move it. I can't." And then he was crying. really crying. His shoulders shaking, still gripping the chair like it was the only thing holding him up. In that moment, Margaret saw past the 32-year-old man to the boy he'd been. The one who'd climbed into Robert's lap for stories, who'd held his grandfather's hand on his first day of school, who'd called him first when he got his dream job. "Oh, honey." Margaret moved to her son, but Daniel shook his head violently. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm sorry, I'm ruining—" "You're not ruining anything," Margaret said firmly, reaching him, putting her hand over his on the chair. "You're not ruining anything." "I just miss him so much." Daniel's voice broke completely. "I miss him, and I don't know how to do this without him. How to sit here and eat dinner and laugh and pretend it's Christmas when his chair is empty and he's never going to sit in it again and I never got to—" He couldn't go on. Margaret pulled him into her arms, this son who towered over her now, and held him while he cried. She looked around at her family. Claire with tears streaming down her face, Sarah openly weeping, Tom clearing his throat roughly, Louise dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "You know what Grandpa would say right now?" Claire's voice cut through the moment. She was smiling through her tears. "He'd say we were making him look bad, crying all over his good chair." A surprised laugh escaped Daniel, watery and weak, but genuine. He pulled back from Margaret, wiping his face with his sleeve. "He'd tell us to stop being dramatic and eat before the food got cold." "He absolutely would," Tom agreed, his own voice rough. "Remember the year Dad fell and sprained his ankle on Christmas Eve? Insisted on hosting anyway. Sat there with his foot propped up, complaining that everyone was fussing too much." "Or the year the oven broke," Rita added, "and he convinced everyone that cold sandwiches were a perfectly respectable Christmas dinner." "Food is food," several people said simultaneously, quoting Robert's favorite phrase, and the dining room filled with tearful laughter. Margaret kept her hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I kept the chair because I didn't know what else to do," she admitted. "I thought if I moved it, we'd all pretend he was never here, and I wasn't ready for that." "I'm still not ready for that." "None of us are," Claire said. Daniel turned to look at the chair again, his breathing more steady now. "I've been so angry," he said quietly. "At everything, at everyone. At myself for not visiting more, for not calling enough, for taking for granted that he'd always be there." "He knew you loved him," Margaret said. "He never doubted that for a second." "I know. I do know that. But it doesn't make it hurt less." Daniel touched the chair, running his hand along the armrest the way Robert used to. "I've been trying so hard to not think about it, to just keep moving forward. And then I walked in and saw this chair and it was like the grief hit you all at once," Sarah finished gently. Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Margaret looked around at her family, all of them in various states of tearful composure, and made a decision. "I think we should leave the chair right where it is," she said. "Not because we're pretending he's here, but because he was here. For 42 Christmas dinners, he was here. And this chair, this spot at our table, it's part of our family story. It's part of who we are." "But nobody sits in it," Claire asked. "Nobody sits in it," Margaret confirmed. "Not today, maybe not ever, or maybe someday, when we're ready, one of the kids will sit there and we'll tell them stories about the grandfather who loved this chair." She looked at Emma, who'd fallen asleep in her high chair, thumb in her mouth. We'll tell them how he'd tap the armrests when he talked, and how he always claimed he wasn't having seconds even while loading up his plate. And how he made terrible jokes that somehow always made us laugh. The puns, Tom groaned. The terrible, terrible puns. What do you call a snowman with a six-pack? Louise asked, and several people groaned in anticipation. An abdominal snowman. He told that one every single year. And laughed like it was the first time. Daniel said, and this time his smile was real. Every year, the same terrible jokes, and he'd laugh harder than anyone. Margaret squeezed his shoulder. So we leave the chair, and we have our dinner, and we remember him, and we let ourselves be sad when we need to be sad. Is that okay with everyone? There were nods around the table, murmurs of agreement. But first, Margaret said, pulling Daniel close again, we acknowledge that this is really, really hard, and that it's okay to be not okay, and that we don't have to pretend to be fine when we're not, even if it makes everyone uncomfortable? Daniel asked, attempting humor but needing reassurance. Especially if it makes everyone uncomfortable, Claire said firmly. We're family. If we can't be messy and real with each other, what's the point? Daniel nodded, taking a shaky breath. Okay. I'm sorry for... Stop apologizing, Louise interrupted. Your grandfather would be proud of you for feeling your feelings instead of bottling them up. God knows he tried to teach all of us men in this family to do that. She looked pointedly at Tom, who raised his hands in surrender. She's right, Tom admitted. Dad always said emotions weren't a weakness. Took me 40 years to figure out what he meant. They settled into their places around the table, moving with new purpose now. The empty chair remained at the head, but it felt different now, not a source of awkward tension, but an acknowledgement of absence, of love, of grief that needed space. Margaret said grace, her voice steady despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. Thank you for this food, for this family, and for the gift of having loved and been loved by someone as wonderful as Robert. We miss him terribly, but we're grateful for every Christmas, every dinner, every moment we had with him, and we're grateful for each other, and for being able to share both our joy and our sorrow together. Amen. Amen, the table echoed. As they began passing dishes, the conversation slowly rebuilt itself. Someone asked Mike about his new job. Louise started telling an improbable story about her neighbor's Christmas decorations. The teenage boys emerged from the basement long enough to load their plates and grunt responses to questions before disappearing again. But it was different than before. Everyone was gentler with each other, more present. When someone's voice caught with emotion, they were allowed to feel it without rushing to move past it. When Claire mentioned how Robert used to sneak extra whipped cream onto her pie, people laughed and cried at the same time, and nobody apologized for either. Daniel, sitting next to the empty chair now instead of far away from it, seemed calmer. He ate slowly, participating in conversations, even managing a few jokes. Several times Margaret saw him glance at the chair, and each time his expression was different. Sad, yes, but also thoughtful. Accepting. Midway through dinner, Emma woke up and immediately started fussing. Sarah began to stand, but Daniel reached for his niece first. Can I take her for a bit? Sarah looked surprised but pleased. Of course. Daniel lifted Emma from her high chair, settling her on his lap. She grabbed his nose, babbling happily, and he smiled at her. A real smile this time, unguarded and warm. "Hey, little one. You know, you look like you're sitting right next to Great-Grandpa's chair. Did you know your great-grandpa? You were just a tiny baby when he..." He paused, his throat working. Then he continued, his voice soft but clear. "He held you when you were 2 weeks old. You fell asleep on his chest, and he didn't move for 2 hours because he didn't want to wake you. Your mom has pictures. He loved you so much, even though he only got a few months with you." Emma patted Daniel's face, unknowing and innocent, and he pressed a kiss to her forehead. Margaret watched her son hold his niece, sitting beside his grandfather's empty chair, and something in her chest loosened. This was how they'd move forward, not by forgetting, not by pretending the pain didn't exist, but by holding it alongside the love, letting the grief and the joy coexist. After dinner, they moved to the living room for dessert. Louise's pecan pie was declared almost as good as Robert's favorite, which was high praise coming from her. The kids taught Emma how to tear wrapping paper off presents, which she found infinitely more interesting than the presents themselves. Tom told the story about the year Robert accidentally set the Christmas tree on fire. And Claire countered with the year he dressed as Santa and scared all the neighborhood kids because his costume was so terrifying. As evening deepened into night and family members began gathering coats and thanking Margaret for a lovely dinner, Daniel found her in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, sweetheart." She straightened up, studying his face. The rawness from earlier had settled into something calmer, though his eyes were still red. "You doing okay?" "I am, actually." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I'm sorry about earlier. I shouldn't have..." "Daniel James Hammond, if you apologize one more time, I'm going to give you extra chores," Margaret said, channeling her best mom voice. What happened tonight needed to happen, for you, but honestly, for all of us. We've all been tiptoeing around it, trying to be strong for each other, and sometimes being strong means falling apart. Daniel nodded slowly. Grandpa used to say that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing the thing anyway. He also said that real strength was knowing when to ask for help, Margaret added, and when to let yourself be vulnerable. "I've been trying so hard to just be okay," Daniel admitted, "to not burden anyone with how much I'm struggling. Sarah tries to talk to me about it, but I just shut down. I thought if I acknowledged how much it hurt, I'd get stuck there. I'd never be able to move forward." Margaret set down the dish she was holding and turned to face her son fully. "Grief isn't something you move past, honey. It's something you learn to carry. Some days it's heavier than others. Some days, like today, it feels impossible, but it gets easier to carry. Not because you forget, not because it hurts less, but because you get stronger, and because you don't try to carry it alone." "The chair," Daniel said. "I thought I needed you to remove it. I thought seeing it empty was what was making it so hard. But now I think I needed to face it. I needed to break down. I needed to stop running from it. And now?" He considered the question. "Now I think I'm glad it's there. It felt wrong when I first saw it, but now it feels right. Like we're not trying to pretend he never existed. We're just acknowledging that he did, and that he mattered, and that his absence matters too. Margaret felt tears threatening again. Your grandfather would be so proud of you. Not just for today, but for all of it. For being honest about your struggles. For letting yourself feel what you feel. I miss him, Mom. I'm going to miss him forever. I know, baby. So am I. They stood together in the kitchen, mother and son, letting the grief settle around them like snow. From the living room, they could hear the sounds of family, Claire calling for her boys, Louise arguing with Tom about something inconsequential, Emma's delighted laughter. Thank you, Daniel said finally. For what? For the chair, for letting me fall apart, for understanding. He paused. For keeping him present, even though he's gone. Margaret hugged her son, this man who'd pushed against the grief so hard that it finally pushed back, and felt grateful. Grateful for family who could be messy and real with each other. Grateful for the years they'd had with Robert. Grateful for the space to grieve together. The last guests trickled out into the snowy night, calling goodbyes and promising to see each other soon. Sarah bundled a sleepy Emma into her coat while Daniel gathered their things. At the door, Sarah hugged Margaret tightly. Thank you for tonight, she whispered. I know it was hard, but I think Daniel needed this. We all did, Margaret said. She stood on the porch, waving as her family drove away, their taillights disappearing into the dark. The house felt suddenly quiet, the way it always did after everyone left, but it was a peaceful quiet, a settled quiet. Margaret walked back through the house, turning off lights, blowing out candles. She paused in the doorway of the dining room. The empty chair stood at the head of the table, waiting. She walked over to it, running her hand along the back the way she'd seen Daniel do earlier. The wood was smooth, worn by years of Robert's hands, his weight, his presence. We miss you, she said aloud to the empty room. God, we miss you so much, but we're going to be okay. All of us, even Daniel, especially Daniel. The chair didn't answer, but somehow, in the quiet of her house on Christmas night, Margaret felt at peace. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But so was the love. So were the memories. So was the family Robert had helped create, a family strong enough to hold both joy and sorrow, laughter and tears. She turned off the dining room light and headed upstairs, leaving the chair standing watch in the darkness, a silent testament to absence and presence, to loss and love, to the empty spaces that paradoxically hold the fullest memories. Tomorrow would bring Boxing Day, and the day after that would bring the slow return to normal life. But tonight, Christmas night, the empty chair remained exactly where it belonged, at the head of the table, surrounded by the invisible but indelible presence of 42 years of love, of stories, of terrible jokes and generous spirit. Robert Hammond wasn't sitting in his chair anymore, but he hadn't left it either. He remained in every story they told, every laugh they shared, every moment they allowed themselves to grieve and to remember. The chair was empty, but it was also full, and that was exactly as it should be. 3 weeks later, on a cold January afternoon, Margaret answered the door to find Daniel on her porch, stamping snow from his boots. Hi, honey. This is a surprise, she said, ushering him inside. Is everything okay? Yeah. He pulled off his coat, hanging it by the door. I was wondering if you had some time to talk, maybe over coffee? Of course. They settled at the kitchen table, steaming mugs between them. Daniel seemed different somehow, still sad, but the sharp edges had softened. He looked like someone learning to breathe underwater, still struggling, but finding a rhythm. I've been seeing a therapist, he said abruptly. Started right after Christmas. Margaret felt a swell of pride and relief. How's that going? Hard, but good, really good actually. He wrapped his hands around his mug. We've been talking a lot about grief, about loss, about how I've been trying to run from it instead of sitting with it, and I realized something. He looked up at her, his grandfather's gentle eyes full of emotion. That night at Christmas, when I lost it about the chair, that was the first time I'd really let myself feel it. Really feel how much I miss him. And I was so embarrassed, so ashamed that I'd ruined dinner. You didn't. I know that now. That's what I'm trying to say. He smiled slightly. My therapist asked me what happened next, after I broke down. And I told her about how everyone shared memories, how we laughed and cried together, how the evening actually became something really beautiful. And she said, that's what healing looks like. Not the avoiding, not the staying strong, the breaking open. Margaret reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Your grandfather used to say that broken things could be put back together stronger than they were before. Like those Japanese bowls, right? Where they fill the cracks with gold? Kintsugi? Yes, he loved that concept. Daniel nodded, quiet for a moment. Then, I wanted to thank you for leaving the chair, for not making it easier on us, for letting Christmas be hard. It wasn't easy, Margaret admitted. I second-guessed that decision 100 times. But it was right. It gave all of us permission to not be okay, to stop pretending. He took a sip of coffee. Sarah and I talked about it afterward, about how we've been dancing around the grief, trying to protect each other from it. Now we're trying to talk about it more, share it. It's still hard, but it feels less lonely. They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that can only exist between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. Mom, Daniel said eventually, do you think next Christmas we could do the same thing? Keep the chair there? I do, Margaret said. I think we should keep it there for as long as we need to, however long that is. And when Emma's old enough to ask about it? We'll tell her about her great-grandfather, about his terrible jokes and his generous heart, and the way he made everyone feel loved. Margaret smiled through threatening tears. We'll tell her that the chair is empty because someone very important used to sit there, and that we keep it there to remember him. I like that, Daniel said softly. Grandpa would like that too. He would, though he'd probably make a joke about it. Something about getting a chair with better cushions, or complaining that we were making too much fuss. Daniel laughed. That real laugh Margaret had been missing. Exactly. As he prepared to leave, bundling back into his coat, Daniel paused at the door. You know what I think was hardest about Christmas? Before I broke down? What? I felt like I was supposed to be over it by now. 9 months felt like it should be long enough, like I should be able to sit at that table and not fall apart. He looked at his mother intently. But there's no timeline for this, is there? No deadline where the grief just stops? No, honey, there's not. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. It comes in waves. Sometimes little ripples, sometimes tsunamis, and we just have to ride them out. That's what my therapist says too. He kissed her cheek. Thanks, Mom, for everything. For the chair, for Christmas, for understanding. After he left, Margaret stood at the window, watching him drive away. She thought about the journey ahead for all of them, the holidays to come, the milestones Robert would miss, the moments when his absence would hit fresh and sharp all over again. But she also thought about her family, about their strength, about their willingness to be vulnerable with each other. She thought about Daniel, taking steps toward healing. She thought about that empty chair and what it represented. Not just loss, but love. Not just absence, but presence. Not just grief, but grace. The snow fell harder now, blanketing the world in white. Somewhere in the house, the furnace hummed to life. Margaret made herself another cup of coffee and settled at the kitchen table with the crossword puzzle she'd started that morning. She glanced toward the dining room, imagining the chair standing in its place at the table. Empty, but not abandoned. Waiting, but not forgotten. "We're going to be okay, Robert," she said aloud, the words filling the quiet house. "All of us. It's going to take time, and it's going to be hard, but we're going to be okay." The house offered no response except the familiar creaks and sighs of a home well lived in. But somehow, in the silence, Margaret felt a response anyway. A presence, a peace. The empty chair would remain at the head of the table, and their family would gather around it again and again, year after year, learning to hold both the sorrow and the celebration, the grief and the gratitude, the empty space and the overflowing love. Because that was what family did. They showed up. They broke down. They held each other through the waves of grief. And they remembered, oh, how they remembered, the people who'd shaped them, the love that never died, the chairs that remained forever theirs, even when no one sat in them anymore. Margaret finished her coffee and turned her attention to the crossword. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in soft, forgiving white. And in the dining room, the chair stood waiting, a silent witness to love and loss, to family and memory, to all the beautiful, terrible, necessary ways we learn to live with absence. The chair was empty, and it was enough.